Welcome to Humanities 1, which is Western civilization. We're going to be talking about the main artistic, musical, literary, and other kinds of human expressions that come out of Western civilization. I hope the course proves likable to you, enjoyable to you, but I also hope it helps make you a better person. Let's begin with the question, what does it mean to be human? Historically, there have been two main answers to that question in Western civilization. There has been a religious answer and a more naturalistic answer. So let's look at what both of those might have to say about it. The religious answers come in a number of different forms in the history of Western civilization, but for the last 2,000 years or so, the dominant religious answer has been the Judeo-Christian one. So we can almost make Judeo-Christianity the main religious answer, at least at this point, for working purposes. But religious answers have varied from mankind as a reflection of God, created in the image of God, for example, or mankind, humankind, is the object of deity's interest. In other words, the gods, the supernatural beings, have some interest in humanity, as in the ancient Greeks, that would be more their view. Or humankind is somehow caught up in the larger scheme of the cosmos in some way. So let's take a look at this Judeo-Christian answer in Genesis 1:26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Many of us are familiar with that. It has it that human beings are somehow created as part of the cosmos, part of the universe, but also in some way very much like God in certain aspects, in ways that the rest of creation is not. So that point of view has an answer for what does it mean to be human? What is humanity? But that's not the only answer. There is also the naturalistic answer. The naturalistic answer is generally summed up in the theory of evolution, at least in modern times for the last, not quite 200 years. It has it that humans are simply one step in a long series of evolutionary steps from primeval matter to something else. So that's another one, that humanity is just part of nature. Humanity is the natural generation of nature. Basic views as to these questions. For example, as to the ultimate meaning of the cosmos. Does the world, does the universe, does human life have any meaning? Those two answers give various points of view and possible answers to that question. How about this? As to whether the absolute values exist. In other words, are there certain things that are just plain right, certain things that are just plain wrong? The religious answer to what does it mean to be human has certain points of view on that particular question, and so does the naturalistic view. Does humanity have any intrinsic value? In other words, are people worth something just because they're people? The two views have different answers and different points of view on that one. And then, how do we understand and analyze human behavior? Again, the two particular points of view have different answers to basic views as to these questions. For example, as to the ultimate meaning of the cosmos. Does the world, does the universe, does human life have any meaning? Those two answers give various points of view and possible answers to that question. How about this? As to whether the absolute values exist. In other words, are there certain things that are just plain right, certain things that are just plain wrong? The religious answer to what does it mean to be human has certain points of view on that particular question, and so does the naturalistic view. Does humanity have any intrinsic value? In other words, are people worth something just because they're people? The two views have different answers and different points of view on that one. And then, how do we understand and analyze human behavior? Again, the two particular points of view have different answers. Well, we need a working definition as we begin this course. And here's the working definition we're going to use. You could find other definitions, but this is the one we're going to use. Civilization is an advanced state of human society in which a high level of culture, science, government, and industry have been achieved. So, what's the difference between a civilization and a culture? Cultures are ways of life and ways of doing things for a certain group of people, but civilization is maybe a step above that. It's an advanced state of human society in which a high level of culture, science, government, and industry have been achieved. So you can have a number of cultures within a civilization. For example, you've got Western civilization now, which has an English stream, it has a Spanish stream, it has a French stream, and many others, all of which build this entire higher thing called a civilization. And that's the definition that we're going to use. How do we inherit civilization? None of us made Western civilization. Today we are the inheritors at a very long remove from the beginning. Well, civilization is passed from one generation to another by a number of different means. For one thing, it's passed by traditions. Traditions are information, bits, stories, fairy tales, rhymes, etc. Let me just give you one example of that. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. Now that's very important in the English stream of Western civilization, because it's almost unthinkable that a child would grow up speaking our language and our culture and not know that rhyme. And yet we've lost the significance of it. I mean, is it just meaningless words? No, it used to represent something. In fact, most certainly, it represents the fall of the Roman Empire about 1,500 years ago. Rome fell just before 500 AD. And so that's the Humpty Dumpty that fell into a million pieces, so to speak. And then what about the king's horses and the king's men? Well, that was about 800 AD, 300 years later or so, when one of the first of the French kings, Charlemagne, came along and tried to revive the Roman Empire, tried to put all the pieces back together again. He was successful about as long as he lived, but then shortly after his death, it fell apart again. We used to think that was important information, that kids needed to remember that. We made it into a nursery rhyme. We've forgotten the meaning of it. But it's part of our tradition, and that's how civilization gets passed down from one generation to another. But also, there are customs, life patterns, for example. Let's just take holidays. How about Thanksgiving for Americans? You know, that date comes along, that fourth Thursday in November, that is Thanksgiving for us. And what if we just lived that day like any other? What makes it different? Well, our customs tell us that certain things have to happen for that to be a bona fide Thanksgiving holiday. For example, would you have to have turkey? Would you have to have the family gathered? Would the weather have to be sort of chilly? Would that make it Thanksgiving? Would removing any of those things from the day cause you to say, well, you know what, we really didn't have Thanksgiving that day? Civilization is also passed from one generation to another by means of training. And training can be either formal, as in this class, where it's a recognized institution of education, where you get some kind of a formal grade at the end, or it can be informal, like a seminar that you attend, a book that you read, or maybe even something like the History Channel. So training can also be one way that we pass these bits and pieces of civilization down from one generation to another. So there you have it. Civilization is passed from one generation to another by means of traditions, customs, and training. Okay, how do civilizations deal with change? Some resist change and cling to what they perceive to be that which is timeless. A good example of that would be ancient Egypt. They tried for perhaps 3,000 years to change very little, because they believed that the original Egyptian civilization was perfect, was what ideal people should live like. And so they tried not to change. Of course they did, but still their whole point of view was not to. Then other civilizations embraced change as dynamic and progressive. Maybe the best example of that would be current Western civilization, the one that we live in which change is supposed to be our friend. If you don't have the latest technology, you're a dinosaur. If you don't know what happened on the news 5 minutes ago, you're out of it. Change is very much something that we seek. Most civilizations find ways of adapting to inevitable change without altering too much too fast. So most civilizations try to change at a reasonable rate, and yet to keep enough of the past to where there can be some continuity. How is civilization measured? Well, we measure it by examining various types of human organization, culture, learning, technology, and expression. So we're going to be doing that in this class. We're going to be looking at paintings, music. We're going to be discussing the cultural context behind those things, the historical factors that contributed to them. And we're going to be, seeing how civilization has progressed. And that's one way of examining or measuring human civilization and its progress. As I mentioned before, this course will view these things from a historical perspective. In other words, I don't believe you can really fully understand the art or the music or the architecture or anything else without understanding some of the history that caused those things to be constructed as human expressions. Human expressions come out of the times and the experiences of the particular artist's own life situation. So history is going to be an important part of this. There are two basic modes of human expression: the reflective modes and the expressive modes. And by reflective, I don't mean you look at yourself in the mirror. I mean that you're thinking about things. It's the whole process of processing information, of trying to think about how things happened and why they happened, that sort of thing. So the reflective modes and the expressive modes. The modes of reflection are religion, which tries to examine reality. What is reality? What do we do about reality? How are we supposed to act? Is there a God? Is there not a God? All of those kinds of things. And so it's a reflective mode of expression. Philosophy is much the same, and it differs from religion in the sense that religion usually makes some sort of claim that the supernatural has intervened, God has intervened, or something to show human beings things they could not figure out themselves. Philosophy attempts to do the same thing pretty much from within human reason. And then history also attempts to discover what happened in the past, why it happened, who caused it, that sort of thing. That makes it a reflective mode of human expression. Then there are the modes of artistic expression, including the visual modes: painting, drawing, sculpture, architecture, photography. The performing modes of artistic expression, including music, dance, and theater, so things that involve more than visual. The literary, which would be anything written, including poetry. We all know what that is, I think. It's the expressive use of human language, not necessarily to be taken literally in all cases. And then prose, which is everything else. Prose is the newspaper, it's your textbook, it's the email you just sent, perhaps. It's just writing that's meant to be understood in a straightforward manner. And then the decorative modes of artistic expression would be like arts and crafts, jewelry making, pottery making, weaving, even tattooing would be an example of that. Now, at the end of this, you're going to be asked to do a discussion board assignment critiquing a certain picture. And you're going to get to choose that picture. These are the questions I want you to answer as you critique that piece of pictorial art. This is part of a series of questions that are presented in Chapter 1. And this particular set of questions has to do with the pictorial arts. There's also one for music, there's one for dance, and so there are a number of these. So the first question is, what is the medium that the picture is made from? And that's the materials used in the actual work. Is it oil on canvas? Is it charcoal on paper? Is it, what exactly is it made from? Sometimes it's obvious by looking at it. Sometimes it has to be understood from reading the caption attached to the picture, or maybe with a little research on the internet. Secondly, what are the important lines and shapes? Are the lines mostly vertical, horizontal, diagonal, and so forth? How are color and light used? Is there light in the picture? Is it coming from a certain direction? Is it meant to have a certain effect on the subject and on the person looking at the picture? And colors, are they bright? Are they subdued? Do they tend to be one or two colors? Or are the colors of the rainbow in the picture? That sort of thing. Fourth is, what are the patterns or the repetitive elements and symbolic meanings of the picture? So that now we're starting to see, that there are certain things that are repeated to form patterns, and so forth. Maybe there are symbols in there like a cross or a star or, something else of a very symbolic kind of a thing. And then 5, how are the parts combined into an overall composition? In other words, what's the picture about? Is it a person? Is it a landscape? Is it some historical event? And in that, how does it impact the viewer of the picture?